TBS News, 6 February 2024, Chinese-occupied Myanmar conflict, China is the center of attention. China supported the removal of Myanmar's democratic government and the installation of a military regime in its stead. The official number of Myanmar's Border Guard Police (BGP) seeking asylum in Bangladesh as of the publication of this article is 95. On Monday morning, 27 more soldiers fled intense gunfights between the two opposing parties and entered Bangladesh. Heavy mortar bombs that were allegedly fired from Myanmar landed and detonated within Bangladesh on the Ghumdum border in Bandarban on Monday afternoon, killing 2 persons. Therefore, like the rest of the world, Bangladesh is anxiously awaiting China's next move as a mediator to keep the dispute from getting out of hand. Abdul Qadir, the General Secretary of the Awami League, also requested China's support because the effects of Myanmar's internal strife have spread to Bangladesh. The Arakan Army and the Myanmar Army are engaged in internal combat within their nation. However, the fierce battle over the border is frightening locals. The Road Transport and Bridges Minister stated, "For this reason, I have requested China's intervention." This expectation stems mainly from China's proximity to Myanmar and its important diplomatic relations with military and democratic movements. China's role in resolving the problem is further enhanced by the country's hosting of landmark projects under the Belt and Road Initiative. Notably, it also protected Myanmar from harsh UN Security Council action in 2018 on a military campaign against mostly Rohingya Muslims, which the US and other nations have condemned as ethnic cleansing. What will China do this time around? China's long-term plan may involve splitting up the anti-junta resistance and ensuring that it depends on China to maximize its influence in Myanmar. These factors, together with the nation's economic interests, security concerns, and stability in support throughout the Rakhine conflict, all point to this possibility. A noteworthy aspect of the history of relations between China and Myanmar is that, in 1949, Myanmar became the first non-socialist nation to recognize the People's Republic of China, PRC. After that, Myanmar was the first nation to settle boundary disputes with China in 1960. Later that year, Myanmar signed the Treaty of Friendship and Mutual Non-Aggression with Beijing, making it the first country to do so. The 5 principles of peaceful coexistence were also reaffirmed by the two nations in 1954 as the tenets that guided the growth of their bilateral relations. These ideals were the cornerstones of mutual respect, sovereignty and territorial integrity, non-aggression, non-interference in one another's internal affairs, equality and mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence. Although China maintains that it has always upheld these values in the face of criticism from the West, in reality, China has regularly tried to influence Myanmar through a variety of strategies. For instance, up until the middle of January this year, China was a party to 3 peace negotiations, albeit brief ones, between the State Administration Council (SAC) of Myanmar and ethnic armies such as the Arakan Army, the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, and the Tong National Liberation Army. Following the most recent accord, Zamin Tun, a spokesman for the Myanmar military, acknowledged the significance of the country's relationship with China for the military rule there. "We will negotiate with China toward reviving cross-border trade," he stated. Even if the loss is more for Myanmar than for China, China also wants that to occur because the armed conflict has resulted in a daily loss of almost $10 million in bilateral trade between the two nations. China ranks among Myanmar's most significant investment sources and its biggest trading partner. With an emphasis on hydropower and mining resource development, processing and manufacturing industries, oil and gas pipelines, and exploration and production, many Chinese state-owned and private businesses have invested in Myanmar. China, which is Myanmar's most significant commercial partner, even supplied the junta with weapons worth over $250 million before ostensibly re-evaluating its intentions in the neighboring, violent nation. Beijing's power also encompasses several other areas, such as the issuance of arrest warrants for individuals having ties to Myanmar's military. China begged Myanmar's junta commander, General Min Aung Hlaing, and other SAC members to tighten down on cross-border fraud activities that exploit Chinese nationals who have been trafficked as forced labor for more than half of 2023. After receiving no response by September, China started using different strategies to deal with the problem. These included detaining and arresting leaders of militias and sending Chinese police to specific border areas that were home to scam centers. Concerns of a breakdown in the military chain of command have been heightened by the ongoing fighting between the armed ethnic groups and the Myanmar military, even after truces arranged by China were announced. Another question is if China has any influence over the rebels, raising even more concerns about whether China can mediate a long-term truce even if talks resume. Interestingly, China has particular interests in Rakhine, mainly defending its transportation and commercial corridor. It is an integral part of the Belt and Road Initiative, connecting southern China to the Bay of Bengal. This includes the pipeline, the recently constructed Kyaukphu port on the Bay of Bengal, and the upcoming construction of road and rail connections to connect the dock to southern China. Combined, these allow China to enter the Bay of Bengal directly for the first time in its history, which has significant ramifications for the balance of power in the region. Thus, it makes sense that China is trying to safeguard its investments in the Kyaukphu corridor in light of the recent fighting in Rakhine by giving the Arakan army a lot of support, including supplies and weaponry, as reported by The Interpreter. China can carefully hedge its bets in the region and use this backing to further its influence against the Tatmadaw. There are further advantages to China's funding for the Arakan army, especially to India's rival Caledon project in Rakhine. By building new port facilities in Sitwe, a river transit system, and a road to India's Mizoram state, this plan seeks to establish a connection between the Bay of Bengal and the country's northeast. Once finished, this will create a direct connection between the Indian Ocean and the northeastern states of India, which are currently only tangentially connected to the rest of the country. China also appears to be worried about the conflict's aftermath of the refugee crisis. The competition has caused thousands of people to be displaced, with some escaping into China, according to the UN. Furthermore, China has already voiced worries about the spike in drug production and use in Myanmar as a result of the military takeover. In the 3 years since the takeover on February 1, 2021, experts have noted a sharp erosion in the rule of law in Myanmar, which is closely linked to the country's growing drug industry. Although the junta's poor governance is blamed for this downfall, some of its leaders are also said to be participating in the lucrative narcotics trade. During a cocaine raid in Bangkok at the beginning of the previous year, Thai officials found assets that belonged to the adult children of Min Aung Hlaing, the head of the military junta in Myanmar. The relationship between the army officer and the infamous arms dealer Tan Min Lot came to light during this incident. China is also worried that outside parties are beginning to influence events in Myanmar. There were rumors in November 2022 that the National Unity Government, NUG, the representative of the Burmese government in exile, was going to open an office in Washington, D.C. The 2023 National Defense Authorization Act was adopted by the U.S. Congress the next month, providing non-lethal support to the opposition in Myanmar. China was incensed by this development, and in the years after, its support has repeatedly swung like a pendulum, at specific points aligning itself with the rebels and at other times leaning towards the military. But looking ahead, what could China's long-term plan be? In the future, it might try to disperse the opposition to the junta by assisting various armed factions in winning small-scale battles along the border in return for giving up hopes of joining alliances that want regime change. As a result of its long-term economic stake in Myanmar and desire to keep it from moving too close to its pro-Western democratic allies. However, the nation's security interests can also be more tactical in the short run. Since gaining independence in 1948, Myanmar's government has found it challenging to maintain authority over the heavily forested border region. As a result, China is concerned that unrest may spread over their 2,000-kilometer (1,250-mile) border. This puts its investments in infrastructure, many of which are located along the wall, in jeopardy and occasionally allows drugs, illegal goods, and refugees to enter China. China may, therefore, see this battle as a way to ensure that all parties to the conflict rely on China, ultimately maximizing Chinese influence in Myanmar, and as a way for the Myanmar army to maintain its hold on power. Thus, this line of action may push Myanmar toward prolonged instability and disintegration despite protecting China's border and upholding its interests inside the nation.